This is a symposium which I've been curious about ever since it began, because in a sense, the title is more or less the description of what I do all day, every day in my work. You know, Art Basel is a fair and organization that was founded by galleries and is still very much heavily driven by galleries. We have a very close contact with our selection committees, not only in terms of who we choose, but also who they choose, but also the whole fair, the development of the fair. So we have a very intimate relationship with our committees, but also those of you who are gallerists know that you tend to see me popping up a lot in your galleries and asking you all sorts of questions about the developments of the scenes, the development of the gallery, et cetera, et cetera. A couple of housekeeping points. First of all, as you see, I owe a deep apology to Barbara Kruger, whose font and style I've obviously lifted. I have been given an hour and a half. I will not speak for an hour and a half. I will speak for 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how things go, and then Georgina Adam will join me on stage. As the moderator, I expect a lot of questions. But as you see, this presentation is in the form of questions. I stand here, obviously, as the global director of Art Basel, but also as someone who, for 15 years before that, was a journalist and who wrote a lot about the art market. So, you know, when Georgina and I spoke about this, she said, please don't do an Art Basel presentation. I said, of course not. Everybody in the room already knows about Art Basel. So in a sense, what I'm hoping to do is to throw a lot of tinder onto the fire that I hope will burn for the next 2 days in the conversations that you're having here. And I'm going to put it forward in terms of the questions that I think a gallerist should be asking themselves. But I mean, before I do that, just a little bit of context. As Gabriella said, galleries is what we do. Galleries is what I think about, not just individual galleries, but also the whole development of the gallery world. Art Basel is at a stage where we are working with a lot of galleries. Now, I haven't touched with this thing before. Let's see if I can do this. Boom, we're off to the races. Excellent. Okay, the only technical problem has been solved. This is a chart that many of you may recognize. It has appeared in the first 2 editions of the annual yearbook that we do. What it shows is the locations of all the different galleries that we deal with on one or more of our fairs. And there are more than 550 galleries that we deal with. What you see, well, it's pretty obvious. I'm sorry, the chart didn't render well. But basically, the size of the circle represents the number of galleries in cities. And what's interesting, of course, is you have places like Berlin, Klaus, or New York, or Hong Kong that have a lot of galleries, but you also have galleries sprinkled all over the world. And I think this is one of the most interesting dimensions of Art Basel as it stands today. You know, the fact that we are dealing with galleries literally spread more or less all over the world. Until last week, in Africa, we'd only had galleries from South Africa. I'm happy to say that we now even have a gallery from Africa that's not from South Africa coming to the Hong Kong Fair. So, you know, even in Africa, which I think is sadly a long way away from being a place where the development of the contemporary art market is a major topic, because there are other major topics to solve first, we are already having interactions with galleries. So let's start with the questions that I think I would be asking myself, or that I think you should be asking yourselves as gallerists. And I have to tell you, this is not going to necessarily be a great way to start your Monday morning, because these are tough questions. A lot of them are really existential questions. So, number 1, are connaisseur collectors a dying breed? This is a topic that I hear over and over and over in talking to gallerists. The sense that the people coming into their booths know much less about art than the people who used to come into their booths. The sense that people are not spending time in the galleries to learn about the artists, that people are kind of shopping quickly, that people are jumping in before they know things, that people are buying not with their eyes but with their ears, meaning that they're following trends, that they're following rumors, they follow a hot name, they come to the booth and they say, I want to buy a work by this artist, and they have no idea what that work looks like, they just know that's the artist to buy. It's hard to say whether they're truly a dying breed. Certainly, the demographics speak against it. I try to read a lot within the art business, within the art press. I also try to read a lot outside of the art press. It's probably the fact of being a former journalist, the child of political science, child of political scientists, et cetera. One of the most interesting pieces that I read that was outside of the art press but has shaped my thinking a lot about what's going on for galleries was an article in The Atlantic a couple years ago by Chrystia Freeland called The Plutocrats. And this is the takeaway from The Plutocrats, and I think it's really important when we think about the development of connoisseur collectors. I promise you, this is the slide with the most words on it. I promised Georgina I would not have 30 slides with 50 words on it, but these things are worth reading. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can read them for yourselves. It'll take about 15 seconds. The important part about the first quote is that it points to the statistical proof that the notion of the leisure class, the wealthy leisure class, is completely outdated. The people I see coming to our fairs, as new collectors especially, are working their asses off. They're making a lot more money than any of us are, but they're working just as hard. They are actively running hedge funds. They are actively running startups. They may be interested in art, but they are certainly not going to devote every Saturday to walking around Chelsea or Mayfair or the East End. And we can like it or we can not like it, but this is the fact. The future clients of most galleries are people who are really, really busy. You know, they are really, really wealthy, but they are really, really busy. And so we have to wrap our heads around what that means. One of the things it means is that a lot of them are using intermediaries, specifically advisors. Another thing it means, sadly, is that a lot of them are starting to buy at auction because it's quicker and because they come out of finance, it feels more transparent to them. One of the things that people point to a lot is the growth of the fairs, the importance of the fairs. And I think part of that is because the fairs have done a good job of being a place where you can get an overview of a global market at a moment where the art world is internationalizing constantly. But I think part of it is also demographics. People say the fairs have grabbed power. I think the power was handed to the fairs by this demographic fact. Your clients, your future clients, don't have as much time as the clients 20 years ago. These are not the people who were handed wealth and couldn't figure out what to do with their time. These are people whose time is devoted to growing their wealth. Now, don't give up hope, because many of these people will retire before the age of 50. And we see this already in Silicon Valley. The people who used to live in Silicon Valley have moved to San Francisco because it's a much more pleasant place to live. And they are starting to buy art. We are starting to see some collectors coming out of Silicon Valley. And I'll talk about that more. But I mean, I think the other thing that we have to face is the fact that they come with a different mentality. I think the classical notion of the collector is someone who came from a very sophisticated background, perhaps came from his family, from generations of collecting, has to be, if not superseded, at least accompanied by the notion of collectors who are coming out of a completely different culture. The French have a term, déformation professionnelle, which means that your entire character, your entire personality, your entire way of viewing the world is shaped by what you do for work. And for those of you who've dealt with people coming out of finance as your clients, you can see that they have a completely different notion. They want to know, what is this worth? Why is it priced this way? What kind of, how do you predict it will develop? Silicon Valley is even more extreme. I went to Silicon Valley about a year ago and had a lot of conversations with the advisors, with the gallerists, with the museum directors there who are trying to make things happen. And it's this kind of, it feels like this amazing tragedy in the sense that you have all this new wealth generation, and they're young people, and they're smart people, and they're countercultural, and why aren't they buying more art? And I think part of the answer is, as I said before, they're just too damn busy. But part of it is also the fact that we have a culture clash. Traditionally, art has been sold based upon two things. The notion of exclusivity, you're buying into a special world, you're getting let past the velvet rope, and the notion, and a market built around opacity, but then also this notion that buying art is a form of social good. You know, that you are, in a sense, you made all your money in banking or real estate, and now you're going to do something good for the world. The people who run Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Tinder, sex hookup sites don't feel like they need to do anything more for the world because they feel like they're already doing a great thing for the world. So we're not going to sell them on the notion that buying art is going to make them a better member of society. And the reality is that I think someone's going to eventually going to crack that code and really start connecting with Silicon Valley. But it's not going to be by making things more opaque. It's not going to be by putting a bigger velvet rope. It's going to be by actually figuring out how to take the traditional modes of selling art, of promoting art, and make them work in a world which is built not on opacity, but on transparency, and not on exclusivity, but upon the notion of a vast market. I don't know how to do it. Otherwise, but even if I did, I wouldn't tell you because it's a secret that we're trying to work on. But I mean, this is what really struck me is that, like, the new, again, and this is a broader notion, the new wealthy, the new collectors have a completely different mindset than the old ones. And if you're going to be a successful gallerist 15 or 20 years from now, you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. You know, I don't think having people at the front desk who don't smile on the way in, I don't think telling people they're going to be on a waiting list because you don't think their collection is good enough, I don't think all the old ways of playing different social hierarchies are going to work. So throw it out and think about something new. So, next. A related topic. And actually, I should go back because I skipped past this one. One of the interesting facts about the ultra-high net worth individuals is that they are much more like each other than like the other people in their country. Partly because they all vacation in the same places, partly because they all have homes in London and Paris and Ibiza. And it's amazing to see how things shift. Like, 5 years ago, everybody was in Gstaad. Now they're in St. Moritz. 5 years ago, everybody was, you know, suddenly everyone is building a house in Ibiza. I don't know why, but suddenly that's where they all are. I'm not one of them, obviously, but the point is, these people move in packs. And you see these packs. You know, I happen to snowboard or ski with some of them when they happen to be in my country, but I see suddenly all the ultra-high net worth individuals are sitting together. And the only thing that connects them is the fact that they're all super wealthy. And if you look at their collections, often they all look very similar to each other. Which brings us to another point, or to the next point. Is art world internationalization purely positive? Now, usually, and I believe this, I make the case that this is a good thing. I think it is a good thing that we have a more internationalized art market, because in the old days, if you were a Spanish artist, you had to first become a famous Spanish artist before you could be exported somewhere else as a famous Spanish artist. Now, you don't even have to have a gallery in Spain to be successful. You know? There was a long period where, I mean, I'm forgetting, if I'm not mistaken, Santiago Sierra was living in Mexico. He had galleries all over the world, a Spanish artist, but living in Mexico, and it was fine. Because they brought his work to fairs, they put him in biennials, et cetera. So the point is, on the one hand, it is a good thing that an artist is not constrained by the place or the generation in which they were born. And if they want to make abstraction at a moment where figuration is really important in their home country, that's okay, because they will find a gallery who has a whole roster of collectors of abstraction, and they will be able to live from their work. I think the internationalization of the art world allows a greater number of artists to be successful, because they can choose 3 or 4 galleries who will in 3 or 4 different countries, who will then find 12 or 15 different collectors who will allow them to continue with their work. So in that sense, it's good. And I fundamentally believe in that. And obviously, the fairs play a huge role in this. This is one of the things that we do best. We do for our galleries what auction houses do for their consigners, which is to find a huge global market and get them excited about it. There are downsides. We fly a lot. It wears us out. But the other downside is something I pointed to before, which is that I was really stunned. I was in LA for the Eli Broad opening, and I was having lunch with one of the major gallerists there. And we said, wow, it must be a great thing for you guys. Everyone's coming to town, you know. Eli's done all this stuff for he said, the person said to me, Eli's only ever bought one piece from us. You know, same thing. I've been to other countries, and you find like the most amazing collector who comes to all your fairs, and then you talk to the best local gallery, and they've never even been in there. You know, So this is one, and I remember, I'm from Chicago originally. I remember this was a huge frustration on the part of the gallerists in Chicago, which was a much stronger scene then than it is now, that the collectors would buy an artist from Chicago, shown with the Chicago Gallery in New York, because that was cooler. They wanted the story. I bought this in New York, this big New York gallery, let me pass the velvet rope. So I think the internationalization of the art world is a fundamentally good thing, but it's not a purely positive thing. It can lead to a homogenization, and if you don't watch out, it will kill you. It will kill the gallerists, it will kill the artists, it will even kill the collectors, And this is where I think sometimes when people talk about fatigue, that's sort of where they're coming from. Which leads me to the next question. How many art fairs should I do? Here you have the director of Art Basel questioning how many art fairs you should do. I have a lot. One of the favorite aspects of my job. People write a lot about the private jets that come and the heavy hitter galleries. There might be people whose favorite aspect of the job would be hobnobbing with major gallerists. I've never been on a private jet, certainly not any of my galleries' private jet. I've very rarely been on a yacht, certainly not any of my galleries' yacht. The favorite part of my job, for me, is to go to a young gallery that has never been in the fair, that is even afraid to apply to the fair and say, you're ready. And then to see them apply, and then to see them get in. And then to see them, in a single morning, have the entire trajectory of their gallery change because suddenly they have great museum directors, biennial curators, and collectors who are interested in their program. That's, for me, the thing that's really exciting about my job. Likewise, also to help a gallery that is bringing back fantastic artists who were completely forgotten because they happened to be in the market at the wrong moment. This is where I think Art Basel can do the most. The major power player galleries need us much less, and we can do much less for them. And they're important because they bring collectors, and they're important because because their reputation helps our reputation and vice versa. But working with the small galleries is really important. But one of the things the conversation I often have when I say, you should apply, there's like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm like, that's fine. When you're ready, apply. If you're wondering what you should apply with, send me an email. I can help you. I can't tell you what will work, but I can tell you what won't work so you don't waste your time on it. One of the trickiest things, and I see some young gallerists out here, one of the trickiest things is how do you manage this whole fair strategy thing? Because on the one hand, when you're a good young gallery, and there's a moment where you have to do fairs, where there's a moment where the fairs are approaching you. But, again, the fairs take away your time and your money from your gallery program. And so I see a lot of people who are just doing too many fairs, and I get worried about it. And I talk to them, and they say, yeah, Mark, but if we don't do the fairs, then the artists will jump to bigger galleries who are doing the fairs. They want their work to be seen. It's an amazing moment. 20 years ago, the idea that an artist would want their work to be seen at a fair. But for the galleries, for the artists, it's also important. They want to be there. They don't want to give you a bunch of little knickknacks. They want a solo booth, or they want half of the booth, but they want to be there. And what's interesting about this, and here we're getting it very much into inside baseball, but since it's a professional conference, I'll walk you through it. We had a lot of conversations along these lines, talking to galleries with young artists, and we kept seeing, we would see a great application from a gallery, and then a second great application, and then the applications would get weak. And I would say, what's going on here? Why are you not holding back great material? Why are you not holding back great artists for Art Basel? And they said, well, yeah, but we did 6 fairs this year, and we had to do a different artist every time. And we had a rule, which was that if an artist had been shown at one of our fairs, or at any one of our major competitor fairs, or at a major institution, we considered them not to be fresh anymore. And the rule made a lot of sense when it was created around the year 2000 or the late 90s when statements kind of kicked off, but that was a totally different moment. And and what we realized is that actually this rule was penalizing young galleries because it was taking away their possibility to show these artists who were at the core of their program. And then we changed what we said, it's okay if it's been shown at one of our fairs, at one of our competitor fairs, in a major institution. It just has to be a new body of the work. It's not the name that has to be fresh. It's the work that has to be fresh. But this is a really kind of fundamental debate that we had, and as a result of just understanding how much things were changing within the environment. So, back to fairs. One of the problems with how many fairs should I do is that you've got lots of new fairs. You know, here are just 3, right? And my apologies to Elizabeth D, because I couldn't find a logo for Independent Brussels. So, but that should also be up there. The reality is, like, these are 3 new fairs. They each have their place. There's a good argument for doing all of them. Paris International was the fair that was founded by a bunch of young gallerists as a parallel fair to FIAC, because there were galleries from Paris that felt like they should have been in FIAC and weren't in FIAC, and they didn't want to go officiel, which is the official parallel fair. And so they started their own fair, and actually it was very, very successful. Art 291 Shanghai is one of 2 fairs, the other one being the Westbund in Shanghai, which I think has very successfully established itself as a boutique fair, very small fair, targeting a very local audience, but it happens to be a local audience, which is incredibly wealthy and much more interested in buying art. Likewise, you know, the Seattle Art Fair, all you need to do is say Amazon and Microsoft, and you're there. I mean, there's good reasons to be there. So all these fairs exist for a reason, but the question is, if you're a gallerist, do you do this fair? Do you not do this fair? You know, if you're a big gallery, it's okay. You've got a fair team, and like they never stop going to fairs. But if you're a young gallery, do you do these new fairs? You know, and so I'm involved with a lot of discussions with people about which fairs they're doing, how to do it. I mean, one of the things that I see is people are getting smarter and smarter about this. I mean, the solo booth is a great way to do it, because you're only asking one of your artists for work. You make a big impact. It's easier in a sense. The other thing that I see a lot is that people are trying to do, let's say, the big international fairs like Frieze and FIAC and the Art Basel fairs, and then with the regional fairs, they're being much tougher. Like, they're doing it once, and if it doesn't work, they pull out. It used to be that people would do it 2 or 3 times, and then they would say, well, it takes 3 or 4 years to build a market. Now, if they go and it doesn't work, they try another one. The other thing they'll do sometimes that I see is they'll do rotations. Like, they'll do kind of like the way biennials are. Like, every September, I'm in Istanbul, but if I'm not in Istanbul, I'm in Sao Paulo. And I think there are people who will do, like, Brussels one year and Artissimo another year. Or they'll only do a fair if one of their artists has a show at the museum. So basically, they're piggybacking on the show. The museum is doing their marketing for them, you know. So people are being very, very tough about which fairs they do and how they do it. And I think it's totally right, because I think in the end, the gallery, and we'll get to this later, but the gallery has to be focused on the gallery as well. You can't just be a fair gallery, because you lose your identity. So, how am I doing? Oh, more or less on time. A related topic. Is the art world's speed a fatal addiction? We don't know yet. We're all prototypes. The art world has never moved that fast. People have never moved this fast. You know? Like, there's no proof that being on email 24 hours a day is a good thing for your health. In fact, there are a lot of proofs against it. There's no proof that flying, I don't even know how many miles I've flown in the last. I mean, it's like, the funny thing is, like, people make jokes about my schedule, but actually there are people in this room who have much worse schedules, because I don't need to fly to Malmo one day and Paris the next day and Barcelona the next day, because my 3 major artists have openings, and I don't need to fly to a collector's house because suddenly he thinks maybe he wants me to go install a work. So my schedule is relatively easy, although it's quite brutal. I can actually plan things. Other people are much more at the whims of their collectors and their artists, you know, specifically gallerists, but even more, I think, auction house specialists. You know, there, if a collector says, I want to sell something, boom, you're on a plane the next day. But I mean, the point is, all of us live in a world which I think is moving much too fast. And I think this is true at many, many levels. I think there's a kind of, but I think to bring it back to the artists, because ultimately that's what it's about, what really strikes me in looking at the careers of artists, in looking at the way they think about their careers, that a lot of them seem to have a model which is much more like that of a football player or a supermodel than of an architect, in the sense that traditionally architects, and there are rare exceptions, didn't even really build into their 40s, and they really hit their prime in their 50s. And so the goal of most artists was, I want a moment retrospective when I'm 50. I want to build a career. I want to be in the canon. I want to do something important. And I don't think that's true for a lot of successful artists today. This was a picture I took from an article this summer about the lawsuit between Bert Kroik and Jan Vo. And what struck me was two things. The thing about Oscar Maria Lucien Smith and Eddie Peake, all of whom artists, none of them that we hadn't heard about 3 or 4 years ago, and are suddenly at the core of the market. But this is also the scary thing here, right? Last year, the number of works, last year the number of works created in the last 3 years that was sold at auction was almost 10,000, compared to only 3,000 in 2012. I follow the market pretty closely. I don't follow the auction market that closely. I go to auctions mostly to say hi to people in the room and encourage them to come to fairs and buy from galleries instead of at auctions. But this was stunning to me, that the amount of recent work that comes to auction is 3 times as high as it was 3 years ago. No, actually, it's worse than that, because it says last year, so basically jumped by a factor of 3 from 2012 to 2014. And one of the things that strikes me, I occasionally go to the auction rooms to see sort of what's out there, right? And I flip through the auction catalogs. What strikes me is that in the day sales, I always used to find the day sales a very sad thing, because I would look through the day sale catalogs and I would see the names of all these artists who were so hot only 5 years ago, and then people were dumping them. Now, looking through the day sale catalogs makes me feel not befuddled, but either old or out of it or what, because I see the names of artists who I don't even recognize. Keep in mind that I sit through the selection committees of 3 fairs on 3 continents, and it's not just the galleries that get in, but it's also the other hundreds of galleries that are applying, and there are still names of artists being sold at auction that I do not recognize, and I have a pretty good memory for names. So what's happening is stuff is going into auction, it's in play, it's in the market, long before the artists are anywhere close to being in the old days, Georgina Adam, who's in the front row, is an expert. I mean, in the old days, even in 95, it was kind of a revolution, the notion that you would sell something that was less than 10 years old. And then the notion was, we only sell things which are on the wait list. Well, I'll talk more about the auctions a little bit later, but the point is, this is how fast things are moving. Things are going from the studio and into auction in 2 years. And it's almost 10,000 pieces per year. And I'm sure the statistic for next year will be more or less the same. One of the effects of the internet, of the fast market, of the fact that artists, I think, are less focused on having a long career, but rather on monetizing their moment, is that you have, and it's appropriate enough for me to say this in Spain, the kind of Zara fast fashion model. How many of you remember the article that Jerry Saltz wrote called Zombies on the Wall? Okay, a few of you. This was the thing that struck me about it, the opening image. 6 different artists made these paintings. All of them very hot, 5 of them male, all of them young. This is not a movement. This is merchandising. And I don't want to talk badly about some of the artists, because I think some of them believe in their work more than others, but I mean, the point is that it's like what you're seeing is this kind of like, okay, that's selling, we're going to do it. I mean, and what's amazing right now is how many different ways young artists are finding of making something which is rectangular and hangs on the wall just like a painting, but it isn't a painting. It's been burned. It's been exposed to sun. It's been dragged through the streets. It's been treated with some chemical process they're not revealing. It's been left to mold. But the point is, in the end, it's an abstract square. And it's sold as an abstract square, and it's sold at a very high price as an abstract square. That's what happens when you have a fast-moving market. And what's amazing to me is I talk to people, Kenny Schachter is an old friend of mine, and someone who's, on the one hand, a very devoted lover of the arts, on the other hand, someone who's totally at the middle of the market. And he'll talk to me about cases, and even he wrote about it, I think. Yeah, I think he even wrote about it, of an artist who's very hot on the weekend, and by the end of the week, you basically can't sell it. Because there's too much work out there. When the catalog resumes of some of the artists in their 30s who are very hot right now come out, you will have the same effect as what happened when Thomas Ruf put out his catalog raisonné, and people saw that there were hundreds of star photographs. You know, suddenly people realize that the supply is much bigger than they thought. And if they're going to put, and when people try to sell, if another 10 come out at the market, then you have this problem. And this is why never, you know, there's a lot of talk about art as investment. Art is not a great investment from a financial standpoint. If you talk about investment pricing, it's not a great investment. If you talk about hedonic pricing coming from the word hedonism, if you add in the pleasure principle, then it's okay if you buy the work that you love. But art is not great because when it goes illiquid, it goes totally illiquid. There are artists you cannot sell. You just can't sell them. You can't even pay people to drag them away for you. I mean, you could probably give them away for charity. If you're lucky and you find a stupid tax auditor, you could probably get a donation. But the point is, there are artists who were very hot 5 years ago. And in fact, this applies. The longer you look, the more true that is. Of the artists who are selling today, probably 80% of them would be unsellable 20 years from now. And that's okay. It's contemporary art. It's about the zeitgeist. But, you know, anyway, I will keep going because now I'm going longer than I thought. Next question, related question. Can my gallery grow with my artists? And I'll just jump ahead to my slide because it's the example everybody cites, although there are others that people could cite. You know, I think the fact that Oscar Murillo went to David Zwirner, the fact that Jacob Cassay went to 303, the fact that Alex Katz went from Pace to Gavin Brown points to the erosion of one of the principles of the evolution of the gallery, which is maybe you're the worst artist in your group and everyone says you're going to be the gallerist. Or maybe you're a failed curator, or maybe you come in from banking and you want to spend your life with artists. But one of the traditional models was that you grow with your generation of artists. You identify the best generation artists in your generation, and their successes are your successes. And if you choose the right artists and you manage their careers well and you're decent with them, then you will grow with them. And so what you have is these kind of many generational galleries, and you can see these, these galleries that have the same artists for 15 or 20 years, It's not so much the case anymore. And I think that model is one that you cannot count upon, And when I talk to young galleries who have young artists who are very successful, they ask me, well, what should I do? And I think, the answer is pay your artists, because a lot of people don't, And that's a good way to lose your artists, But also, if you feel like an artist might leave you, then at least try to buy or keep some of their work for yourself. So at least when that big gallery comes in and takes them away and jacks up their prices, you're not the pure loser. This is tough. Most galleries don't have a lot of extra capital lying around. But I mean, I think it's an interesting dilemma. And I think one of the things that we see, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I think it's relevant, is the more the auction houses encroached on the secondary markets of the galleries with the big blue chip artists, the more those galleries reach down into the middle tier for the artists that are selling to compensate for the fact that their secondary markets of their blue chip artists are not feeding them the way they used to. The more those middle tier galleries go to Lower East Side and look for a hot selling artist. And suddenly what you have is that artists are going boom, 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 and they have like 6 shows across 4 galleries. Or they just jump straight like this. This is very common. And I think what's interesting about it is, if you wrap up a lot of what I've been talking about, it points to the question of a gallery's identity, right? If a gallery is no longer representative of a region, or of a movement, or of a generation, what is a gallery's identity based around? And the best word I can come up with, and I think this is something that you guys should be talking about, because I feel like I'm just throwing questions out here, and I hope they're going to stir a lot of discussions, but I think the best word is maybe a psychographic, that a gallery represents a certain way of looking at the world. And what's really interesting to me is not only this, but also the super young galleries, super hipster young galleries in weird neighborhoods who are working with extremely old artists. And part of that is financial necessity, because their best young artists are getting poached by older galleries, but also because it makes sense. And they're looking at who are the artists that represent that represent what they believe in? Who are the artists that they looked at when they were in art school? Who are the artists, the older artists who have a relationship to the younger artists? Because if you do it right, what it means is that you're building a program, which is a program, and it's not about, these are all Colombian artists, or these are all artists in their 20s who went to Cal Arts. These are artists who make sense together. This is a discussion. This is a dialogue. That's what sucks collectors in. And I have to make a point to all, I'll make a point that most of you know, but that sometimes that bears repeating. One of the jobs of a gallery is to sell art. Just as important is growing collectors. Just as important is taking people who have the means to buy art and making them passionate about it. I have seen some of you sell art. It is miraculous, not because you're a snake oil salesman, but because you're like preachers. Because you take someone standing in front of oil on canvas or a pile of soap and make them believe that this is a transformative object, And I think that ability, the ability to grow collectors, is incredibly important. So, next, what does Simco mean? How many people know what Simco is? Okay. It's 10:30, so I think it's time to wake you up. Stefan Simkowitz, son of collectors. As the New York Times put it, the art world's patron saint. How many of you read this article, even if you didn't recognize Simco? Okay, so Simco is Stefan's company. So a lot of people dislike Stefan. He has a very hard-nosed way of moving through the art world. But you can't disregard him. You disregard him at your peril. I would encourage you to read the articles, the interviews. He gave 2 interviews for ArtSpace, which I think were probably more valuable for gallerists than this one was. Although you should also read this because it's just part of the culture générale of the art market. What strikes me about Stefan is that he has disintermediated the traditional gallery process. Stefan has identified good young artists, people who everyone is talking about, people like Petra Kortreit and Emilia Ullmann, Spanish, John Raffman, et cetera, very early on, before they're working with galleries. He has introduced them to gallery. He's set up their gallery shows. He has bought enormous amounts of their material in the same way that Saatchi did, and he's been very transparent about what he has. And he has a collector base, software guys, sports guys, socialites, that nobody else has. You have to go through him to get to them. And you can dislike him, but the fact is, he is able to identify what kind of art will be popular, and he has a market maker quality in the same way that the Rubels do, for example. What he puts forward has momentum because he puts it forward to his people. So I think you have to understand that the reason why Stefan has been successful is A, he's moved much faster than a lot of galleries have with these young artists, and the other is he has done this thing that we talked about before with Silicon Valley. He has taken a market that was built on opacity and been much more transparent. He goes to an art studios, he puts his stuff on Instagram. So I would study this. If I was a gallerist, I would study very closely what he does and why it's successful. So this article came out at the end of last year. Earlier this year, Stefan Simkowitz became Simco. Now, if you look at the services he's offering, a lot of those look like the services of a traditional gallery, right? Artist management, buying and selling art, client representation, which is something a lot of European galleries did. It used to be before there were art advisors that if you wanted to sell to certain collectors, you had to go through the gallery that was kind of their guy. So study this. Because if you're a gallerist, it means something to you. So, we've been dancing around around this topic a lot, but let's get into it. The auction houses. Again, a brief history. We've gone from a period where 10 years ago, Philippe Segalot was considered to be a revolutionary for bringing young artists into play. Now we're at a stage where artists that many people in this room have never heard of are coming into day sales, especially at Phillips, because that's something that they specialized in. We also have galleries who have tried more or less successfully to function, or auction houses who have tried more or less successfully to function as galleries by representing artists directly. Two things worth bearing in mind. Actually, let me do a quick thing, just a little quick calisthenics. How many of the gallerists in this room have had artists' work come up for, your artist's work come up for sale at auction? All right, yeah, there you go. It's fun, huh? So, two things to bear in mind. 49% of the auction volume in 2014 was comprised of roughly 1,300 works. So, the huge numbers are compiled around a small group of artists. Unfortunately, that doesn't go into depth. You know, when we think of auctions, we think of like Warhols and Basquiat's and Koons, but the reality is this, and this is something where, to come back to the name of the conference, like this is in my conversations with galleries, in talking to galleries, I've become more and more aware of this problem. I was aware even before I came to Art Basel of this kind of turf war around the blue chip artist. You know, if you're representing Christopher Wool, and his work comes up, you know, if you're Loring Augustine, you're representing Christopher Wool, and his work comes up to auction, suddenly you need to rally up $3 million to make sure that it doesn't crash, you know? So that I was aware of, you know? And then I was conscious of the fact that for people like, you know, like Wade Guyton, you know, who's a much younger artist than Christopher Wool, but also like you see these works go through the roof, you know, very, very fast, you know? And Wade had an interesting approach to this, which I'll get to in a second. But so you have like Wool, then you have Guyton, you know, and then you have, I remember having a conversation in April. One of the nice things about the selection committee meetings is they last a long time. They don't last all day long, so you have very interesting conversations with people. I remember being on the beach in Miami and talking to Tanya Layton, a gallerist from Berlin, about her things. And we were talking about, yeah, the auction houses. And she said, yeah, but Mark, you know, I've had cases where Dan Reese, who is, I think, the hottest artist in her program, she's had cases where the auction houses will call her up and say, we have a Dan Reese coming to auction. It would be a pity if it didn't sell. Can you please rally your collectors around this? Now, put yourself in Tanya's position. There's a limited amount of this work. She's not the only gallery representing him. There's a limited number of collectors. She's not getting a commission from the auction house. But if she doesn't do this, it might crash because they have no idea who those collectors are. So suddenly she's working for the auction house. You know? So I thought, okay, that's as bad as it gets, which is already pretty crazy. The idea that the auction houses are turning young gallerists into their sales agents, unpaid, as a way to protect their markets. But then I was talking to Simon Preston from Lower East Side Gallerist, and I was talking about this, and he said, hey, Mark, you know, John Gerard, who probably fewer people know of than Dan Reese, you know, but like, you know, he had a case where John Gerard's work was a work that should have been priced at £80,000 was put into sale at £8,000. And suddenly all his collectors started calling him and saying, what the hell is going on? Did his market collapse? He said, no, it's just the wrong price. You know? The auction houses are not vested in these young artists. And it's a very different thing. If a blue chip artist comes and it doesn't sell, people, oh, well, you know, whatever, it's a bad day or something. But because, and this is a weakness of the gallery system, because the only sales we know about, the only sales which are publicized are at auction, that's the paper of record for the trade. And this is something that I think you guys should talk about. Is it really such a good thing to hide what's going on in terms of your sales? Because what it does is it allows the auction houses to define what's important and what's not important, what's working and what's not working. If you know, I remember, do you remember Pierre Hubert's sale? Do you remember what David Zwerner did? David Zwerner, Pierre Hubert, who was a collector and gallerist, put into play a lot of works that he had bought for a museum, which he wasn't building in the end. And David Zwerner, who represents Ankawara, said, we will not bid on this work because we do not support this sale. And if it doesn't go, that's okay. But you can do that with Ankawara. I'm not sure you can do that with Dan Reese. I'm not sure that someone in Tanya's position can email all of her collectors and say, hey, this work is coming into play. If you want to buy it, but we're not encouraging you to do it. And if it doesn't sell, it's not because there's no market. As you know, there is a market. Because there's no transparency on the gallery side, the galleries are a little bit at the mercy of what goes on in the auctions, and it's not a good thing. I mean, some artists have taken very productive or sort of innovative approaches. This is what happened. One of Wade Guyton's U paintings came up for auction in this in Louis Gouzer's famous mix of old and new, and Wade's approach was to basically point out that he could print out 100 of these paintings, so it's a digital file, and that's what he did. He said, hey, there's more of them out there, hoping that it would depress the price of the sale. It didn't. But I mean, Wade has done similar things. Like at Art Basel, he had 6 paintings that were exactly the same size on 6 different stands. Wade is in a position to do that in a way that other artists are not. But I think it's good that he's doing it. I think but it's interesting because at one point I asked Wade if he would write an introduction to the next, the annual year. The next one will be year 46. We've had collectors write introductions. And I asked Wade. I said, hey Wade, I thought this was really interesting. Would you be willing to write about what how your feelings about it? And he said about this auction and how your approach and how it worked and how it didn't work. And so you know what, Mark? I'm an artist. I want to make art. I don't want to spend all my time talking about what's happening at the auctions. But the point is, there was a moment where for him it was such a critical issue that he really jumped into it. So, related topic. We've been talking about funds for years, and the interesting about funds is that most of them fail. Most art funds, there was a time, Georgina, refresh my memory, there were like 38 art funds at one point that were floating out there, and in the end, the Fine Art Fund was the only one that really stuck around. Funds are tough because usually the funds rely on advisors, and those advisors are probably more likely to buy stuff themselves than to tell the fund what to buy. But the point of what's interesting now is that we have 2 interesting developments. How many people know what the Carlyle Group is? Carlyle Group? The Carlyle Group? Most important, or one of the most important private equity groups in the world. If I'm not mistaken, both the Bushes and the Bin Ladens were investors at one point. I mean, that's, the Carlyle Group recently announced Athena Art Finance, which is focused on lending money to people who have works which are worth at least $500,000. So that rather than selling it, you can borrow against it. But the point is, they've got $1 billion fund to loan money against artworks, which is interesting. The notion that a serious group is willing to go that deep on art. And you could say, this doesn't affect me. I don't have any work that's worth more than $500,000. But then you have LevArt, which was founded by the same guy that did ArtRank, the people that did buy, sell, hold, etc., which was kind of a funny thing, but it wasn't a business. This is a business. And this is the same concept. It's loans against art. But it's not $500,000. It's $5,000. 4% nice minimum fees, no minimum money tomorrow, like a payday loan in the United States. You need some money, and it says, incredibly fast and easy loans against artwork. We accept all works from emerging to blue chip. I have no idea if this is working, but the reality is someone is seriously putting out the proposition that whatever artwork you own, I will give you cash for it. Part of it is that I think Carlos is a big data guy. And the more work he has getting offered him, the more he knows what's out there and what is valuable. And if suddenly 7 people are offering him an artist, it probably means that artist's market is not going so strongly. So, he's got different businesses going on, and it's a very smart move, But the fact that you have both a very high-level finance group, one of the most important finance groups in the world, publicly led by Oliver Sarkozy, running into this, and then also a much faster kind of LA-based internet startup kind of thing, means that finance will be a big part of things. I'm not sure. This is maybe something you can discuss and get back to me on. I'm not sure if this is a bad thing or a good thing for galleries. Part of me thinks, you know what? It might be a good way to fund production of work for a biennial. It might be a good way. It might mean that instead of selling a work, you can borrow against it. It might mean that these galleries that lose an artist because someone else can fund more production, can keep the artist. I'm not sure, you know. I really don't know. You know, I think in theory, liquidity is good for a market, especially liquidity, which, you know, someone like this, like, you know, you might have a bunch of work from an artist that left, and you don't want to sell it right away, but you need cash, and maybe you take the risk that you'll be able to, that the artist market will grow, and that you can take loans against 3 paintings and only sell 2 of them or 1 of them. I mean, I'm not sure, but the reality is cash, finance, et cetera, needs to be, you need to understand it, I think, if you want to be a gallerist. And I know people who become gallerists don't do that because they wanted to get into finance. And a lot of people who feel like the game they entered is not the game that they're playing anymore. By the way, it's exactly the same thing for many of the journalists in my former profession. You know, professions change. The world changes, and if you can choose to get out or you can choose to stay in, but you're going to have to face the realities. You know, and I think let's say the more and more successful your artists are, the more and more you're going to have to play this. You're going to have to understand this finance game and its implications. So, related in the sense that, you know, this is basically a finance company which grew out of a website that nobody knew who it was at first. This art rank buy, place, or buy, sell, hold. So, if I'm a gallerist, these are the questions I should be asking myself. The obvious thing is that Instagram can serve as a great form of promotion. You know, you can hit people in their phones, you know, with what you want. I know people who specifically photograph work so it will look better on Instagram. You know, I'm willing to bet that if you were going to do a big data analysis of the size and format, especially the format of the works being created by today's young artists, you would have a hell of a lot more squares than rectangles, because that's what looks good on Instagram. You know? I'm not, you know, in the same way that I think if you were able to trace the history of architecture from the point at which computer-assisted design becomes a part of the daily process, you would see a lot more things which look exactly the same or look exactly like the sort of template version of a doorknob or a door. Artists make squares. It's not even a conscious thing. It's just they wanted to look on Instagram, and they notice that they're not conscious of it, but the thing that looks good in a square gets many more likes than the things that doesn't look good in a square. In the same way that if you guys were to smile and pay attention every time I walked this way, and to start looking and doing your email every time I walk this way, by the end of the day, I'd be over here, because I want you to smile and pay attention. I think the Instagram has that same effect. It's a very personal thing, you know, and I think, so does it replace an art forum ad? Maybe. I still think that one of the big stipulations that a lot of artists have when they move to a new gallery is, I want a full page ad in art forum. That's like the yacht of being an artist, you know. Does it replace art fair booths? Certainly people are selling work over Instagram to the same kind of global audience that you try to reach via a fair. And they're having conversations with those people, you know, but not the same kind of conversation that you have in person. Does it replace my gallery? Do you not have to have a gallery if you have an active Instagram account? Certainly, Stefan Simkowitz sells a lot of work without having a gallery. For a secondary market dealer, I think it could absolutely be the case, especially when you combine sort of all-purpose Instagram for the stuff you're just trying to sell, and DMing, like direct messaging, for the things you're trying to sell to someone specific, you know. Does it replace me? Does it replace the gallerist? I remember I was with what is it? Is it Ernesto Leme? Which is his first name? Gallerist from Brazil? Eduardo, sorry. I blame jet lag. I was with Eduardo Leme in Brazil. And we were talking about an artist who was very hot. And he said his problem was that she would take pictures of the work when it was in the studio. And he would start getting calls from collectors who were saying, I thought you said there was no work available. I'm on the wait list. Why am I not? And so the artist, in a sense, was selling the work before he even saw it. You know? So one could argue there will be artists who say, you know what, I don't need to do this gallerist thing. I can sell the work myself. and some of them will, you know. All this being said, and I am a total technophile, you know, this article, I don't know how many of you read it in the New York Times, was very funny because it starts with this kind of straw man, and then further down, it starts with this notion, oh, sorry, it's not right here. There was this notion that Leo DiCaprio had bought this work, was sold this year to actually Leonardo DiCaprio. And then further down in the article, Lisa Schiff, who's his advisor, says, that's absolutely not the way it happened. But of course, people run with that notion. I still think that the best way to sell art is to stand in front of the work with the collector. I still believe that. I still believe that that's why fairs work, because we are human beings. There's something primal. There's something about the way we sell and also about the way that we get to know someone. You know, I think you can do a lot of work with the digital. You know, there's no question that people are doing a ton of work with the digital. It's something I spend between a half day and a day a week thinking about what more we could do online for our galleries, you know. My background as I was a journalist, you know, in 92, 93, 94, I was writing for Wired, among other people. Like I'm a total technophile. I'm married to a PhD in computer science. Like, I've always believed in this. We were the first fair to be on Twitter. We were the first fair to have Facebook. We were the first fair to have an app. As many of you know about our Kickstarter initiative. So there's a lot you can do online. There's also a lot you can't do online. And I think convincing someone that they should be buying work from you in a market that's, in the end, completely shaped by perception over Instagram or over email is a very hard thing to do. I think once you know each other, a lot can get done. But I still think there's still that value of that face-to-face contact. Which brings us to the next question. People have been predicting the death of the gallery for a long time. And yet, when I was in LA, I saw both, and yet, we see how the major galleries just keep building new spaces all over the world, you know? And in fact, this is outdated because White Cube is retrenched from Hong Kong, or from Sao Paulo, sorry about that. But the point is that you know, in the moment when everyone says the gallery is outdated, no one comes to galleries, et cetera, you still have people building these kind of global empires. You know, but at a lower level, you still have small galleries. If you go to the Lower East Side, most of the galleries there are on their second space, and it's 3 times as big as their first space. And yet, people say no one goes to galleries. So I think the point is, well, I'll get to that in a second. I mean, one of the things that was striking to me, I was in LA. I saw this is a shot, an interior shot, a construction shot from the new Hauser and Wirth Gallery, which will be amazing. But it's also more than just a gallery. It has a restaurant. It has a huge bookstore. You know, it's in a very, it's not in West Hollywood. It's not in Santa Monica. It's downtown. You know, and they're building sort of a major complex there, and it's going to be an amazing building. You know, that's Hauser and Wirth, and this is this is Michelle Macaron's new space in LA. So, you know, I mean, Michelle is a major gallerist, but she's not at the Hauser and Wirth level. You know, and it's interesting that she has 2 artist studios who are just directly adjoining the space. So, on the one hand, we keep hearing that the gallery is dead. On the other hand, we keep hearing no one comes to the galleries, no one's walking in anymore, and yet people keep building galleries. They keep expanding their galleries. So I think for the moment, and it's not just because most fairs require you to have a gallery space and to keep and run exhibitions in it. I think the gallery space is still essential because I don't think artists want to work with a gallery that doesn't have a space. You know, I was having an interesting conversation this morning with Carlos Duran from Senda about moving spaces and how much it energized the collector base. But also I said, I think most galleries should probably change spaces every 7 to 10 years, because after 7 or 10 years, your artists have done 2, 3, 4 shows in that space, and there's just nothing left to give. So either you change your artists or you change your gallery. But I think this change of venue, this expansion, this change of neighborhood, et cetera, has a real value in terms of keeping things dynamic. I mean, that being said, on the one hand, we have the fact that people are expanding, moving, getting bigger spaces, going to other cities, et cetera. On the other hand, we have the analysis of Magnus Resch, the German art market analyst who did a massive survey. And his argument about why galleries are not more financially successful was two-pronged. The first is they're paying their artists too much, which is an interesting argument, not one that many artists are going to agree with. And the other argument, well, there were three arguments. Another argument was they're not paying the staff enough, that if they paid people more, they would get better people who could sell more work and work more efficiently, that there's too much reliance on the kind of jeunesse dorée who will work almost for free, but are not actually very hard workers a lot of the time. But the other thing he said is people are paying too much for real estate. And I'm not sure that's true. And the question is, why are people paying so much for real estate? One is, I think, to secure their artists. And the other is that I think if you are a gallery that does a lot of fairs, you need work. And it's a lot easier to take the work that you didn't sell from a show, not that you intentionally don't sell it, but if you have work that didn't sell from a show to bring it to a fair, than it is to ask the artist for something that's going to go in a fair booth. So I think as a way of generating inventory and as a way of keeping your artist's program lively and excited, the gallery space is still essential. And I think there are a great many, I have to say I like my job a lot. And one of my great pleasures is to actually go to galleries and to go to a city, I recently went to Bogota for the first time. And it was really interesting to see, like you have, Casas Renier and Instituto de Visión. These are, in the fairs that we do, or in the fairs I see, these galleries are, it's like 30 to 50 square meters and, similar architecture. But if you go to Bogota, Casas Renier is in this beautiful house in the middle of a very patrician neighborhood. It's a great architecture. It has several fantastic spaces. It's got a publishing unit upstairs, And Instituto de Visión is basically a plot in a much more quartier populaire, as the French would say, like a much more middle working class neighborhood. It's a plot of land that used to have like a kind of farmhouse on it and a bunch of little shanty structures that chickens ran around. So they took out the shanty structures. The chickens don't feel like they've been gone for all that long. They still have, and it's beautiful, this house made out of very rough brick, weathered. It has this kind of wabi-sabi beauty to it, weathered. And there's just a very utilitarian roof over the top of it. So two galleries that look very much the same in the fairs have a totally different thing. They're in a totally different neighborhood, totally different architecture, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is the interesting thing. When you see a gallery space and not a gallery's booth, you understand it much better. You understand which neighborhood do you choose to be in. I visited last night with Alex Nogueras and Rebecca Blanchard in a totally new space, totally new neighborhood. Like it's not even in Barcelona. What's the neighborhood? What's the architecture? I think it was very interesting in Berlin when people started moving out of Mitte and into other places where you had like wainscoting and terracotta ceilings. It wasn't white cubes anymore. I think it says something. I think in terms of defining the gallery's identity, the architecture of the gallery is much more important in a way than what the fair booth does. The fair booth is kind of a flagship store or a kind of prototype, but it's not really, you don't understand a gallery until you've seen the space. You've seen the neighborhood it's in, you've seen the architecture it's in. So, an hour, almost done. Get your questions ready. So, this is question number 11. And I can imagine some of you are feeling like this right now. Why should I continue being a gallerist? The auction houses are encroaching on my territory. It's becoming a finance game. It's, like my artists are going to leave me. I have to figure out how to use Instagram instead of printing catalogs, et cetera, et cetera. I can't give you an answer, but I hope you find one. There are a lot of good books about the art world. My favorite is from Massimo Menini. I don't know how many of you know this book. Pizzini. It's a beautiful little book in English and in Italian. And it's his stories of all the artists who he worked with and didn't work with. There's an amazing story about James Lee Byers hassling him to work with him. And the final part of this little sentence is, I only understood too late. I'm sorry. Read this book in your darkest moments as a gallerist. Read this book because it will inspire you to live a life with artists and with collectors. And as much as they get a bad rap, there are collectors who I know who are among the most sophisticated, interesting, philosophic people that I know. There are people, someone like Harold Falkenberg, who's a voracious collector. They even called him a Hannibal collector because he bought so much work, you know. But Harold is someone who has deeply studied what it means to be a collector and is deeply critical of the ways that other people collect. There are people like Alain Servet in the front row who thinks a lot about what it means, what this intersection between art and finance means, and who collects in a way which is very specific and very much against the current. You know, there's a French saying, "Il y a que les poissons morts qui nagent dans le même sens que le fleuve." Only the dead fish swim in the same direction as the current. And I think if you can find the collectors who are live, who are still alive, who are not buying with their eyes, or with their ears, but with their eyes, who are people you can get excited about, or who can get excited about you can get excited about, who can get excited about your work, it can happen. And you even see it in places like China. You know, like China was a place which was dominated by the auctions. And over time, there's a new class, younger, of collectors has emerged who understand that when you buy from a gallery, you support the artist. That when you buy from a gallery, you're part of a program, you're part of a dialogue, you're part of a conversation. But I think that conversation, that talking, is an essential part of what it means to be a gallerist in the future. I'll stop on that note.
Well, that was a bit difficult act to follow.
Sorry.
I think you've given us such a wonderful overview of what's going on. And I'm sure that there are a lot of questions. So what I'm going to do is just ask one question, and then we'll open it up to you. Please wait for the microphone when you ask your question, because we're being recorded. So I was interested, Marc, as I say, it was a fascinating overview. I was interested that when you put up the slide about Oscar Murillo, it was in the Daily Telegraph in a section that's now called Luxury.
I noticed that as well.
And you have just come back, I know, because I was with you there as well, from Beirut, where the Aishti Luxury Goods Mall has inaugurated an art space. So I'd be interested to hear briefly, because I know there are a lot of questions, do you think that this creeping overlap of the luxury goods companies, of the notion of art and luxury being the same, do you think this is something worrying for the art market? Or something like the other points you make that the gallery world needs to adapt to?
I mean, I think there are two realities. One is that the people who buy luxury goods, people who have the means to buy luxury goods, are the same people who have the means to buy art. It's a similar market. And the other reality is, yes, that fashion is more and more interested in what art is. They rip us off more and more. I will say I'm never comfortable with the notion of art being sold as a luxury good. I think it's totally counterproductive. I think there's a magic to art. There's a magic to the selling of art. And if you sell it as a luxury good, you strip away the magic. You may do it's sort of long-term greedy versus short-term greedy. I think the short-term greedy approach is to sell it as a luxury good, like it's a handbag or something. The long-term greedy is to say, no, that's not what we do. You know, and I think one of the things, and I, as I said, I'm not here as the director of Art Basel, but I will say that I think one of the interesting developments for us has been how much our partners who come out of the luxury goods world, or out of the, who are targeting ultra-high net worth individuals, in the old days, when I got there 8 years ago, 20 fairs ago, were happy to just have a logo and a lounge. And now they want to do something in the art world. And you have people like BMW, luxury car company, doing this Art Journeys Prize, where young artists from the youngest sectors of the fair are selected, shortlisted, and they can each propose a journey that will take them around the world. And Samson Young from Hong Kong is doing this journey where he goes around, and it's all about bells. And the interesting thing about bells is that in times of war, they're melted down to make cannons. In times of peace, the cannons are melted down to make bells. And so this tonality of war and peace is what he's studying. I won't go beyond that because it's not fair for me to represent his work. But the point is that I think, you know, a company like Davidoff, which is, you know, a cigar company, you know, originally they would just hand roll cigars and hand them out at our events, and now they're doing a residency for Dominican artists because they make the tobacco plantations in the Dominican Republic, for Dominican art, or for Caribbean artists all over the world, and also for people from all over the world to come to an amazing place in the middle of the DR. Anyway, that's my Art Basel thing, but I think the point is, it can go well and it can go badly. You know, I'm not a big fan, but you know, when artists start designing purses, Murakami got away with it, but a lot of people don't. When artists start designing purses, it usually feels like a death knell. When they start designing cologne, I don't think most artists, I mean, some artists are amazing at this and they get away with it to the, you know, so it's not always like that, but I think as a rule, hopping into bed with fashion brands, with luxury, is a tricky thing. And it takes a very strong artist, a very strong gallerist to make it work for them. You know, the question is always, you know, do I use the tool or does the tool use me? And I think it's something that can be used. It's a possibility that artists have now, but it's not one that should be taken lightly.
So I'd like to open up to questions. Ella in the front row.
He needs a microphone.
First of all, Mark, thank you so much for sharing that first-hand experience of the art market that you have. It was, I think, very useful experience. I'd like to come back on two slides. One on the auction, and the second indirectly on the poaching of the artist. Yeah. It will go back to something which also from an economical point of view that I have, and not so many people have here in this room, is on the fact that what is missing, because on the auction house, I remember what the letter you wrote to the auction house directors, I think at Basel, Miami, 2014 or 2013, I don't remember. And what surprised me is how easily you won the hands. You just wrote a letter to those auction houses saying, we don't want to have any of your representative on the booth of the galleries on the fair, and you know they should keep their distance from the clients. What it's showing me, it's a lack of a kind of a professional organization between the galleries. What still strikes me in the arts market is that it's every single galleries individually. They're very keen on that individualism, but it's weakening them down very easily because it's like, you know, shooting a platoon one by one when you have a big gun in front of you. So what's your view about the necessity of galleries to organize themselves, to define best practices, which I think is very important. We spoke about poaching, because right now, in my economic point of view, I find the art market like a jungle. It's the law of the jungle and the law of the strongest. You know, the one with the most influence, the most money is winning. So what's your point of view in this important forum? Because I think Talking Galleries is helping to do that.
Okay, so several topics. And I'm going to try to answer them. If I forget one, call me on it. Just quickly, for those who don't know, as Alain pointed out, in December of, was it 14 or 13? It feels like it was longer ago. 13. In December of 13, I signed a letter to all of our gallerists saying that we had reached an agreement with the auction houses about the behavior of auction house specialists at the fairs, which said that, among other things, they shouldn't approach clients in the booth, they shouldn't denigrate works, they shouldn't you know, basically they shouldn't treat the fair as a happy hunting ground. It wasn't as easy as it looked. It was very strategic. I won't say we started with the auction house that was the most likely to agree to this, and then we went to the other auction houses and said, do you want to wear the white hat that they're wearing, or do you want to wear the black hat as the one who didn't sign this agreement? And then eventually, and it all, I mean, it's relatively clear. What's interesting is that all the auction houses designated someone to whom, if there were cases, we could complain. So it was, I mean, I think it was a kind of gentleman's agreement that was reached, you know, and the reality is, you know, and the auction houses, you know, and I don't know, and the defense isn't the wrong word to say, but like the auction houses said, you know what, there are also gallerists who come and try to break up our sales and denigrate the quality of the work and just say, you know, this, I have a better one, I have a cheaper one, et cetera. But to get to your bigger point, running a gallery is very hard, and you're often in a very reactive state. I know a few galleries that have actually taken the time to sit down with an organizational consultant or strategic consultant and elaborate a 5-year plan, a new organizational model, a new efficiencies, et cetera. But I don't see a lot of long-term strategic thinking taking place outside of conferences like this one. And we have, within our Basel, we have the selection committees. We also have a joint committee, which doesn't select anything, but it's a representative of several representatives from each of the committees where we talk about the big picture issues. Things like, what should we do about these young galleries who are losing their artists because we're not letting them bring them to the fairs because they're burned, So we do a lot of long-term strategic thinking because our greatest fear is not that other fairs will bypass us, but that being the best fairs in the world will be irrelevant because the galleries are so weakened by what's going on around them, And so one of the things that I think you'll find us doing more and more is stepping into places which were considered beyond our bailiwick at some point, because what we've realized is that to the extent that we can help galleries, whether it's with digital initiatives, whether it's with discussions of best practices or whatever it is, we should do that. We have a kind of, especially now if you remember that second slide with all of these galleries that we're dealing with, and if you project that over a couple of years, it's like 700 of the best galleries in the world. We have a kind of federating function that can go beyond the commercial platform that we have. The law of the jungle, I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't know of any industry which is getting easier or less competitive. I don't know of any industry where globalization offers as many pitfalls as it does opportunities, where speed is not the defining characteristic of what's going on. So, I will say that it's not, you also see artists who are doing things like, for instance, Oscar still shows with Vanessa Carlos, Carol Beauvais still shows with Michelle as well as with David Zorner, for example. I don't know why we're, but there are cases where an artist jumps from one gallery, but not all the way. It's a very interesting kind of thing to watch and to try to map, But certainly, I think artists are highly conscious of the fact that their moment may not last forever, and that they need the right gallery to work with, And I think, if you look more historically, like why is it that Monoha and Gutai, which you could buy for pennies on the dollar before, now goes through the roof? It's because the Japanese gallery system wasn't very strong, and it wasn't until Western galleries like Fergus McCaffrey, like Blum and Poe, went to Japan, resuscitated these artists, gave them a global platform, that it became important. So I think again, this is why, not just because I work for Art Basel and the galleries are my clients, I work for Art Basel because the galleries are my clients. I like galleries. I think galleries play an incredibly important role. I think galleries tend to be the one taking the biggest and the first bet on an artist's career. And I think the difference between having the right gallery and the wrong gallery is just as important in an artist's success as their talent and their inspiration.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Toria. You started by being very excited about having one African gallery in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
My question is there a strategy for you to include more African galleries? For me, it seems very small number.
Sure, it is.
In terms of galleries, and is there like a strategy from Art Basel to invite them to Art Hong Kong to then being invited in Art Miami or Art Basel?
There's no. We don't believe in quotas. We believe in observation. When we see that a gallery has the potential, we encourage them to apply. Before that, there's no point. We've made the mistake in the past of taking a gallery too early, and it did nothing for anybody. It created subpar booths for us, and it put the gallery under enormous pressure, and they failed on the stage where they just couldn't compete. There's tokenism or quota politics just don't work at all. So, I think we have someone in our team who's in charge of monitoring African collectors. I and Noah Horowitz both went to 154, the African Fair, as I had in the previous years. We had conversations with people. We looked, we said, to the galleries that seemed promising, we said, if you have questions about your application, please come to us and we can help you at least not waste time. But that's, I think, as much as we can do. And I think it's a natural process. The best we can hope for is that the galleries that are ready will apply to the shows. But I don't think we should take galleries who are not ready. And in a sense, a lot of that has to do with the development of their domestic market, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I should say is there's this notion that you do Hong Kong to get to Miami, you do Miami to get to Basel. That notion is wrong. First of all, it's different committees. It's also different directors who are responsible for each of the fairs. And finally, already now, this notion there's this hierarchy, like it's easier to get into Hong Kong than it is to get into Miami, it's easier to get into Miami, into Basel, is totally wrong. There are galleries who are getting into Basel who are not getting into Hong Kong. There are galleries who are getting into Basel who are not getting into Miami. There are galleries who are getting into Miami who are not getting into Hong Kong. These are different committees. There is a strategy, and the strategy is that each fair needs to be rooted in its region. When we, and I saw, hi Annette, when Annette and I launched the show in Hong Kong, when we bought Art HK and we started studying what it would take to develop it, one of the things we realized is that organically, the Art Basel show in Basel was 50%, roughly, European galleries, and that the Art Basel show in Miami was 50% North American and Latin American galleries. And we said, you know what this means? A fair needs to be rooted in its region. We cannot copy-paste the existing Western fairs into Hong Kong. And there we said, actually, as a rule for our committees, that 50% of the galleries need to have spaces in Asia. There's a few galleries like Perrotin and Continua who have spaces in Asia and are active there, and they represent Asian artists and work with Asian collectors, so we count them in that. But it's still 45% galleries from Asia. So what that means is effectively, in Basel, you have, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, you probably have about 180 European galleries, let's say, or 150 European galleries. In Hong Kong, you have 120 slots for all Western galleries, including North and South America. So what that means is that basically there are many, many fewer slots in Hong Kong, even though it's a younger fair for European galleries. So again, I want to dispel that notion because I think it's a very common one. In the same way, there's this notion that first you do statements, then you do features, then you get into galleries. Some people go straight into galleries. Some people never move from statements into galleries. There's no natural progression. Every year we look at all the applications. Once again, every fair has its own strategy. I'd rather not talk too much about Art Basel, but anyway, it's...
There was a question here. Could we have the mic? Over there. Okay, the mic's on its way.
Hello, good morning. My name is Alejandro, and thank you very much for your excellent talk. I like it very much. My question is, what is your vision how is going to evolve the art fairs and also the collecting? Because sometimes I have the sensation is to focus in objects, and I feel will be more to the experiences. And also about the gallery itself is a word from the 18th century that means just putting objects. I asking about your vision.
I mean, it's a hard question in the sense that I think the fair model, the gallery, and also to some extent the gallery model is very much based around it's around objects, selling objects. Objects are unique. You can buy them and you can own them, Experiences are not so much so. I mean, obviously one of the things that Art Basel has done is a lot of experiences, whether it's films or performances, things like 14 Rooms or Temple del Postino or the ICC, in Hong Kong where we have a, 1,500-foot sculpture, so to speak. And these are not things that you sell, but I think they're important. And I think an art fair to stay relevant has to include that aspect of an artist's work. You have to have the installations, the video, that kind of thing. That being said, I'm not sure those are the best places to sell this kind of work. There's also a very limited number. The market for video is much smaller than the market for painting. I mean, infinitely smaller. The market for large-scale installations is quite small. Most people just don't have the room for it. And I'm not even sure. There's a lot of great digital work out there. I'm not sure. What does an Art Basel digital sector look like? Is it like a bunch of people typing away at screens? I mean, I don't know how many of you saw the John Rathman show at Anita Zabludovich's in the Foundation in London. If you didn't, and if you can, you absolutely must go. I mean, that's like, welcome to the future. But I'm not sure that 5 years from now we're going to have like 100 Oculus Rift machines upstairs and unlimited with people trying different works. I'm not sure that a fair is the right environment for that. I mean, the thing we also have to keep in mind is that most fair goers feel this constant pressure to see as much work as possible because there's an unbelievable and unseeable amount of work at those fairs. So durational things are difficult. I mean, I know people who go to Basel and only go to Unlimited, but that's a very particular kind of connaisseur. It's not even, usually they're not even collectors. They're people who just want to see the most interesting, large-scale art of today. But I mean, my question is, I guess, whether the fairs are the right context for that kind of work. I mean, it has to happen, and I think the fairs serve the value of allowing galleries to sell the work, which allows them to produce this work. But I'm not sure that the fair is the best context for this work.
Klaus, in the front row, in the second row, please.
Yeah, I think you have to accept your role as the American oracle of Basel, and so there will be a lot of questions of
That's fine.
which more or less have a relation to that role. But I recently read an article from Blouin Art Info. It was last week. I mean, it's not the voice of truth by all means, but it's about the so-called single venue gallery, which most galleries are, I would say, and which most creative galleries are. And they are making a list of galleries which have ceased to exist over the, I mean, some of them because of age and some of sickness. But there is a concentration in the art world, and the domination of the multiple venue galleries seems to be also in relation to Art Basel and to the different fairs, seems to be very important. What do you say? What do
I say? I mean, I guess, I would say that in comparison, like, okay, I'm sure you also saw this article which showed the unbelievable number of MoMA solo shows that had come from 6 galleries, right? So in comparison with that, Art Basel, where the galleries you're talking about have spaces which are no larger than the 25 or 40 other galleries in the front row, and where you don't have a huge predominance of their works in Unlimited, is a more egalitarian space. I mean, the reality is, no art fair is going to change the fact that certain galleries have more firepower than others, and that means that they have, they're able to draw bigger artists, they're able to throw bigger dinners. But I think, when we think about these galleries, as I said before, like this, they are not there. I mean, we treat them well the way we treat our other clients well, but it's not like we're giving them 10 times as many VIP cards or 6 times as much space or that kind of thing, And I think, I think from our perspective, it's important that it works for all the galleries. Like, there's never a fair where everybody does well, but when I hear that the powerhouse galleries did well, but also the young galleries did well, and the mid-tier galleries did well, then I feel like the fair is working. If I hear only the heavy hitters did well, then I feel like something is wrong, And I think that it's perhaps an altruistic notion, but my feeling is that when it works well, a fair is a very optimistic gesture on the part of the galleries, because what you're doing is you're pooling your collectors with the notion that although your collectors will discover other galleries, other people's galleries will discover you, other people's collectors will discover you. So, I mean, I think in a sense, it's good to have the big powerhouse galleries there because they bring a kind of collector who only follow them, I remember talking a few years ago, and Annette, I'm sorry to bring back a nightmare, but we did a floor plan, a very difficult floor plan in Miami Beach. And I put Tanya Banakhdar next to Larry Gagosian, and she was really upset. And I was like, well, why? And she says, listen, I'm across the street from Larry, and the black cabs come up on the south side of the street, and they never come into my gallery. So my notion was, wow, we're going to cross-fertilize, and it didn't quite work, But I think, I will say that I think, when you pool all of these collectors together, I still think that it wasn't a bad place for Tanya to be, because people do stumble across things, And I think one of the things that we have done at Art Basel is to extend the opening VIP hours with the notion that if you give people 4 hours, they go to see the 5 galleries that they always see. If you give people a day and a half, they see those people they have to see, who will be upset if they don't show up. And then they start wandering. And then they go to dinner. And then they hear about some gallery they've never heard of. And then they go see that before the crowds come in. So I think, the fairs need to get as much from the powerhouse galleries as we give to them. And I certainly don't feel like we do more for them than other people do, or than they do for themselves. Do you have a follow-up question?
If I may.
Or should we let someone else go and
why
then?
don't we, yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to you,
So
Klaus.
we've got 2 questions here.
I owe too much to Klaus to leave him hanging, but I do want to give other people a chance.
Hi, I'm Sylvia. Every time we attend an art fair, we are sometimes overwhelmed about all these parallel programs of sections, performance programs, you name it. And I was wondering what's your feeling like. Is it necessary? Sometimes it's disturbing even in our interaction with the visitors. So what is the added value of this in your...
It's funny, I remember Sam Keller, who was our predecessor, coming back from his first Art Basel Miami Beach when he wasn't running it and saying, oh my God, there's so much to do. And we're like, yeah, Sam, you always said yes to everything. Of course, we added this, and we added that, and we added that. And it's, I think, and what was interesting to me is when we did 14 rooms, most of the gallerists loved it. They loved the fact that there was something so different from the fair. They loved the fact that we created this immense palace for performative art. But some said, it distracts from the fair. What was interesting is it really distracted from Design Miami and to some extent from Lista, because people felt like they had to do the main fair, and then they did 14 rooms instead of the other shows, So I think there is, to some extent, there is like, too much is never enough, and then but I think you have to be selective. I think you have to be realistic. In the same way that I think one of the reasons why, for instance, a lot of people feel like the week in FIAC is more pleasant, the FIAC week is more pleasant than the Frieze week, it's just because there's less to do. You leave Paris feeling like you saw the Pompidou show, the Musée des Modernes, the Palais de Tokyo, you saw the Marais, you saw Belleville, you saw the fair twice, you saw, Officiel maybe, you saw Paris International, you had a nice lunch, you caught up with an old friend, and that was like 3.5 days. Whereas I think, with London, there's just too much. There's just so much going on, and I think in the same way, a fair which has too much going on can leave people unsatisfied. On the other hand, I do think that someone who's studying whether or not they should come to a fair, whether they're, some people come to the fairs and they go to like 7 or 8 talks, Some people go to 7 or 8 collections. I don't think we expect everybody to do everything, but we like to think that by having a rich and diverse program, we give people a kind of choose-your-own-adventure modus. Miami is the classic example of that. Some people party until 4 and show up at 2 in the afternoon. Some people go to bed at midnight after having some dinner with their friends and go for a run on the beach, and they rock up at 12:01. Or first they go to the Rebels and the CIFO, and then they come at 12:01. So I think the notion, the original model of the show, which was much more like a flea market, which was kind of buyers and sellers and objects, and if you weren't buying or selling, you didn't have a place there, has been replaced, for better or for worse, by the notion of the art fair as a kind of family reunion for the art world. And there are people who go there. You see curators there and museum directors. And I remember talking to Matthias Mühling, who's a very funny director of the Lenbach House in Germany, and he was saying, I was asking about fairs. He said, I always come later in the week. I said, why? He said, well, once people have sold, you can start asking them to support catalogs. So that's why he goes to fairs, is to build up support for his coming shows and catalogs. So the fairs they have this kind of federating, agglomerating position, and I think part of what makes that work, and quite frankly, we use our talks and panels as a way to have curators and artists come who might not otherwise come, but also because we think it's important. I come out of content. I was a journalist for 15 years, and one of the first things that we did when I joined the organization was to start putting all of our talks and panels online in video. It's not always beautifully recorded, but the point is, it's there. So in the 8 years that I've been there, we've probably put, I would think it's probably something like 1,000 hours of video online. And that's valuable, Anyone with a high-speed connection, whether they're in Vietnam or Tunisia or whatever, can actually go there and watch these things the same way they watch other things. And so I think there is a kind of agenda-driving focus that goes beyond just sort of the buying and selling of objects. I think in the same way that, again, for better or for worse, what a show like Art Basel does can help to define a market. And I think Unlimited is the best example of this. Unlimited was started in 2000 because the show organizers realized that there was a lot of work which just didn't fit in a booth. It was too loud, it was too noisy, it was too smelly, or it was video, and nobody was willing to devote enough space in a booth to just show one video, And I think, in a sense, it was realizing what was going on. In a sense, it was defining what was going on. Because I think for a lot of people, the fact that Art Basel, as the major show, put this kind of work forward, not just for museums, but for private collections, meant that a lot of private collectors suddenly realized, yeah, I can buy this. People will sell it to me. And actually, I have room for it, because I'm just converting some giant paper mill, you know? So I guess the answer is, yes, it can be too much, but we're not expecting you to do all of it. And I think the role of the modern fair is to sort of try to serve a lot of different. You're not just serving the buyers and sellers. You're also selling. Let's put it this way: like when we think of what we're doing for the galleries, it's not just about attracting collectors. It's also about attracting curators and critics and museum directors and all that kind of thing. I'll keep talking.
Thank you for your talk.
This is the last question. Thank you.
It just made me think about all the other fairgoers. Like, I don't know, my experience from London when I was studying there was that you do have, you know, the people that are there to, like, mainly collectors, but then you know you want, as you said, the curators and the critics, and but then you have a lot of people that are just there to be there with their family or with their friends, sort of like a meeting point, sort of like a place to be seen, a place to hang out. So yeah, the parallel programs are one thing for people to do. But then on Frieze Masters, what struck me was like the addition of two, let's call them prime London restaurants, like it was Locanda Locatelli and Numo. So you have this other kind of, you know, experience in an art fair, maybe eating at a restaurant, but outside of the restaurant with art around you. So I'm just wondering, how much do art fairs consider these type of visitors, and how much does the architecture of the fair sort of give to them, you know, in terms of where they can hang out, sit, have their coffee, walk around? What are the programs addressed to them, or do they just happen to be visitors, but the fair is not really not addressing, but, you know, how much are art fairs thinking about this other sector of visitors?
I think there are two answers to that. On the one hand, I know a lot of galleries would be very. I know gallerists who say, "Listen, you could just close after the VIP days because the rest of it is a waste of time." You know, from a financial perspective, I can say that you know, average across the fairs, you know, like ticket sales only represent 10% of our revenue. So from a financial perspective, it's really not that important to us. But I will say this. If you have, I mean, and you could also solve this problem very easily if you wanted to have fewer visitors by just jacking up the prices to like £150, and then people who could take it as a tax write-off or a business expense would go, and others wouldn't. But there are two things you have to keep in mind. One is, I think most artists want their work to be seen. And the other thing is that you never know who the future collector or artist or curator is. We live, thankfully, in a world where it's not just the children of the social elite who become artists and curators and critics. And, you know, I think a fair has to have this kind of populist quality to it. I mean, we have, you know, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of school kids who come to our fairs every year. And, you know, keeping them under control is not easy, but we also think it's an important thing. I mean, I remember someone, Yana Peel, one of the great patrons in Hong Kong, saying, "Mark, before Art Basel came to town, the only place we could show our children art was at an auction preview." You know, so I think that's, and I think, you know, obviously, but I mean, things like restaurants and architecture, you don't like build a restaurant for the general public. You build a restaurant because people need to eat, and you want them to stay in your fair to eat. It's not good for the galleries if people feel like they have to leave the fair to eat well. You know, one of the great things we're jealous of any fair that takes place in a tent is they don't have to deal with long-term concession contracts, which constrain you in terms of what you can do. You know, we found ways around that, but I mean, it has been a real issue for us. You know, in the same way, like last year we quadrupled the amount of sitting space in the halls in Miami Beach. And it doesn't matter whether that sitting space is for aged billionaires or young kids, but people need to sit during a fair if you expect them to walk through 250 booths. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that we have a radically different approach in terms of the general ticket buying public than in terms of the VIPs. We as I said before, we segment their presence so that the people who are at the core of the gallery's immediate success, which is to say collectors, critics, curators, museum directors, have the time to see all of the fair and not just part of the fair. but again, I feel like if you're a contemporary fair, you have to take the general public seriously. I don't come out of the art world. A lot of fair directors didn't come out of the art world. I don't know why that is, but the reality is, if the art world had been locked away behind some, in some ivory tower, then we would never have gotten here. I'll take one more question if that's okay. I don't really care. I mean, I'm happy to take
one more question. There's at the back.
Klaus, I'm going to owe you a question. Sorry.
I was just wondering, Marc, if you would speak a little bit about the notion that you put forward in the talk about transparency.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about the merger, the potential merger of the finance world with the art world, vis-a-vis that transparency. But I think we all know that consensus really builds value in the end.
Right.
Could you speak more about that?
Well, I mean, I just feel like I'll be very honest with you. It's a notion I'm still grappling with. And I feel like there may need to be a redefinition of how we do business, and transparency will have to be part of that. What I was speaking about very specifically was the fact that right now, auction sales, which we all know are not a level playing field, which we all know have their own, there's a whole, I mean, and the New York Times documented this very well this week, there's a whole choreography going on. There's chandelier bidding, which is even legally allowed. You have people bidding on works at a discount because they're guarantors. But those are the prices that define what's going on in the market. And I think the fact that very few galleries in New York respect the law that you're actually supposed to have all your prices, printed to the front desk, that there are, some people are getting 0 discount and some people are getting 20% discount. So some people are getting more than that because they're heavy hitters. Some people are getting extended payment terms, some et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I think it goes against the way the art business has been conducted for the last few centuries, but I think moving forward, it shouldn't just be the auction houses who are defining for the public what's going on in an artist's market. But the danger of transparency is this. You won't be able to hide when an artist's market has collapsed. Of course, when it's collapsed, usually it collapses at auction, so everyone's clear on that anyway.
Well, there's really 2 markets, right? There's the financial market and there's the museum market for an artist, which can be independent of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, except of course the people mix the two by forcing people to buy a work from a museum when they buy a work for themselves. I mean, but of course, yeah, the museum market is different. It moves much more slowly. It has a higher value for the artist because the galleries, the artists usually are not sold off by the museums, although it happens occasionally. But yeah, in the museum market, actually the museum market is to some extent more transparent because museums announce their acquisitions. Every year you get a list of these are the works that were bought. Although I don't think they usually say for how much, Anyway, I don't know. What I do know is I don't have an answer, but I feel like the fact that the auction prices are more and more visible for younger and younger artists means they're defining more and more of people's perception of the market.
I worry about the impact of the museums down the road too with, say an artist does get that MoMA retrospective at 50. Where are the works? If more than 50% of them have been sold at auction, we no longer have the provenance. We're no longer able to identify the potential lenders, and this becomes a huge issue for gallerists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, eventually, I would assume that most major curators have sources at the auction houses to whom they can pass a word and say, I don't know who you sold this to, but could you please tell them there's a MoMA retrospective coming up? And then you just have to hope that someone doesn't sell the work while it's hanging on the museum walls, as has happened. But
we're going to take a coffee break, but Marc will still be with us, so you'll be able to continue the discussion with him. For those of you who haven't been able to ask their questions, I want to reiterate our thanks to Marc, who's given us a really thought-provoking and fascinating presentation.
Thank you.